We are excited to be with you today. So, together with Val, we are recent graduates from the Extension School. We have both completed the Sustainability Master's Program, and both of us were really excited about agrivoltaics. So, we have independently completed our capstone research on the topic and are excited to present some of our findings to share with you today. We are in the middle of what I like to call the electrification dilemma. As you probably already know, we are in the middle of one of the greatest transformations we have seen to date. That transformation is transitioning from the fossil fuel economy to the renewable energy economy. However, as you can see on the chart to the left of me, in the US, the renewable energy, it represents only 13% of the overall grid. Of that, solar is a tiny percentile. So we are not nearly close to the big leap we need to make to become fully renewably run. At the same time, we are facing increasing demand for energy. That is driven by amazing innovations such as electric vehicles, new appliances that we all get to enjoy it. And of course, all of you have used an AI or a chat GPT agent. So a lot of that cool tech is also requiring a lot of energy. In fact, it needs so much energy that certain communities have already forbidden the construction of new data centers because the energy grid is becoming so overpowered by all the intensity that data centers require. Why is this important? Well, because we need a lot of new energy and we need it now. At the same time, it has to be renewable and it has to be easily accessible, which leads me to talk to you about solar. The number one question I get, or rather feedback I get when I talk about solar is, well, in order to transition to solar, we need so much space and we don't have enough space available in order to do that. However, that is a myth I would like to demystify, and something that I have been faced with doing the research on agrivoltaics. If we look at the total space available in the US, about half of it is now used for agriculture. Following that, there's land that has been disturbed. So think about it as land that has been used for extraction or as other type of activity that has now rendered this land not fertile or not suitable for urban development. Next, we have cities and lake areas, and the tiny square after that is all the surface area we would need in order to have sufficient solar energy, generated by solar in order to satisfy the energy demands of the US. The argument here is, where should we place that square? And with Val today, we would like to tell you why the agriculture space is actually the best possible use place to position it. So that brings me to agrivoltaics. What are agrivoltaics? Well, it's just a fancy word to imply that it's a dual use of land. And typically that is dual use of land for agricultural activities as well as solar. You're probably familiar with some of the use cases presented on this slide. So we have traditional use cases on the top, such as crop production, animal husbandry, and ecosystem services, which are typically pollinators. But there are also more innovative solutions, such as reinforced mounts to accommodate for tractors and elevated positioning to accommodate for bigger animals such as cows, and semi-transparent panels for greenhouse solar. The big argument here are economics. You might say, well, we could just put solar on all the residential and we would have enough energy that way. In theory, yes. However, as you can see, that would not be the best economic use case. So while there are certain activities which are concentrated enough, such as manufacturing facilities or other activities that can draw sufficient energy to optimize use utilities, solar, such as agrivoltaics, is really the best economic use case scenario. In addition, agrivoltaics provide many ecosystem benefits that are frequently not talked about. As you can see on the right-hand side, pairing solar with certain crops that are sensitive to sunlight actually allows for better crop production, but also for improved production of the solar because of the energy microclimate created under the panels. In addition, this co-location provides savings of resources because due to the reduced evaporation, the landowner has to use a lot less watering. So we estimate these savings to be at about 30%, and the improved efficiency of the solar panels is at about 10%. In addition, there are benefits such as biodiversity because of the co-location of pollinators between the panel spaces, and the preference of certain species such as birds to use the elevation to save themselves from predators. So there are all these amazing benefits that other energy sources simply don't provide. Last but not least, agrivoltaics also solve for the current conflict in land use that is tackling the SDGs. In the conventional solar farm, we are optimizing for renewable energy. So we are tackling the renewable energy SDG as well as climate action, but we are not able to tackle the zero hunger SDG, which is, of course, very important, especially when we think about the population increases that are happening today. Instead of doing either or, the combination of agrivoltaics not only solves for renewable energy and zero hunger, as I have just explained, we are also tackling water and sanitation because we are preserving natural resources. But we are also unlocking other benefits. By unlocking dual use, the farmer and landowner is able to create incremental income streams because now instead of just selling produce, they're also able to either utilize the solar so they're not spending as much money on fuel, or they're selling into the grid. So they're creating a secondary source of income by not dedicating that land to a single use. And of course, because farms are frequently located in rural areas, we are also unlocking economic elevation of these communities, which is very important because a lot of these communities historically have been shut down, and the farmer population, specifically in the US, is facing enormous challenges in terms of their debt obligations. So agrivoltaics could really be an important solution in reversing that. And with that, I would like to pass the microphone to Val, who will take you in depth into some of the research and specific use cases she has seen on American farms.
Thanks so much, Anastassia. I'm going to have you control the slides. I additionally was inspired by agrivoltaics, especially after moving on to a 5-acre farm in Central California with a 10-kilowatt ecovoltaic system. So I knew firsthand that it could work at the small scale, and I wanted to answer the question, why aren't agrivoltaics deployed at a larger scale in the US, considering all of the benefits that Anastassia just mentioned, like clean energy, supporting rural economies, water savings, biodiversity, aiding biodiversity, and potentially addressing social justice issues. The research gathering I did had several parts to it. There was a survey, there were a series of interviews, there was visiting conferences. Conferences were in solar and in farming and in agrivoltaics and in soil health. The stakeholder groups were divided up into farmers and ranchers and solar developers. So, and the farmers were a diverse group ranging from 1,000 acres of cattle, ranchers, large-scale commodities and corn and soy, organic farmers, smaller livestock, row crops, orchards, even an urban rooftop farmer. And the solar developers ranged from small to community scale to utility scale. Some that were just interested in starting to develop their agrivoltaic technology or the arrays design, and others who are starting to implement it. When it came to expert interviews, I interviewed people who worked for NREL's Inspire project, Agrivoltaic Clearinghouse, part of NCAT, Agrivoltaic Researchers, American Farmland Trust. And the experts and the farmers were located all in the US in about 10 different states. Here you can see just a brief overview of some of the results. The farmers are really concerned about economic security, extreme weather, and climatic events. When it came to agrivoltaics, they were worried about affordability and finding trusted partners, and the solar developers are concerned about climate change. They didn't have access to available landowners or as many as they wanted to, and they were also facing the same challenges that many people in renewable energy are facing when it comes to transmission and zoning. Next, as part of the research as well, I chronicled a case study where I followed an Illinois family farmer's efforts to develop an agrivoltaic project on their farmland. There's a lot I could speak to about this case study, and I'm happy to in the future, but I've just distilled it down to a few takeaways. First of all, prior there was extreme community resistance to solar until the state authority superseded local regulation, making it that those communities no longer had the ability to deny a solar project. So this greatly increased the interest and the acceptability of solar in their area, and that happened after the closure of coal-fired power plants and the state wanting to increase the renewable energy offerings. When it came to agrivoltaics, the family, they had been solicited, but heavily by solar developers, offering them, 8 times what they were earning previously leasing their farmlands. When they approached those same developers and said, would you like to partner with us? Are you interested in helping develop in a way that we can continue farming this land we've been farming for hundreds of years? They got answer no after no after no. They knew through our learning journey, talking to people in other states who said this is possible, we're interested in partnering, but unfortunately for them, this shows like this experience speaks to the evidence of what we've heard earlier in Climate Action Week about sort of the lack of listening and lack of engagement with stakeholders, and this like unwillingness to collaborate, sort of holding back sustainable renewable energy development. And lastly, their journey is not over. Unfortunately, their local utility, Ameren, is not accepting any more project proposals. They say the grid capacity is full. I view this as, trying to use it as a positive as we have these sort of stalling moments in grid and storage capacity expansion. That is an opportunity for developers and community and ecologists and farmers to sort of to reflect and see if they can't go beyond to really maximize like the biodiversity and the economic and the community aspects of a solar development. This inspired me to design what I'm calling a policy rubric scorecard. And so, this scorecard is really designed to orient stakeholders at the onset of a project. So it's for landowners, whether they're farmers or land conservationists or municipalities, along with the developers and the municipal regulators. They can use this to guide their project in order to meet as many sustainable development goals as possible. I'm happy to talk about the rubric too with anyone who wants to discuss, but it makes essentially ecovoltaics projects the baseline norm for any particular site, knowing that agrivoltaics is not always going to be the best determination, but it also helps prioritize community buy-in, the land stewards as experts, creating long-term accountability in managing the ecology and offering equitable economic structures for all the parties involved. So when it comes to economics, I also could talk about this for a long time, but I'll just point out a few that kept coming up in the expert interviews. One was the 6 kilowatt hour incentive that was part of the Massachusetts program that was paying developers a little bit more to develop agrivoltaics as opposed to just regular ground mounted solar. And although this incentive came with some other, let's say, boundaries that was prohibitive for agrivoltaics, on the financial end, it did really it helped pencil out because obviously a solar developer is not going to be able to maximize their electron harvesting with an agrivoltaics development because they're going to have to space the arrays further out. Another thing that was also often repeated among experts was the need for lower property tax base. So in areas where perhaps agricultural land is taxed at a lower rate than something that's zoned commercial, and now that it's a solar development, it's commercial. It could be a change in zoning, or it could be just a temporary benefit that keeps the property tax low that also helps a project pencil out. And then lastly, I've briefly mentioned this before, but the desire for many of the farmers to have more buy-in and see more economic benefit. So instead of just a lease payment, which is what solar companies usually pay out, an annual payment or a monthly payment over the lifespan of the project, they're also looking for a percentage of electricity profit. This comes with a little bit more risk, but it also potentially comes with a higher amount of return. I think the farmer range holder stakeholder group is, they're wary of like getting in bed with the devil and imagining that a big energy developer is going to come in, they're going to make millions and millions of dollars over the decades lifespan of these projects, and they're just going to see a small amount of that. So my final analysis is tried to align where the two stakeholder groups were aligned and where there's room for growth. So as you can see, they're both inspired by income. The farmer ranch holder stakeholder group really wants to see trust and transparency in any business dealings. They want to maintain their current land practices. The solar developers are motivated by climate change. They're motivated by growth in their business. When it comes to the barriers and the comfort zones, they're facing the same barriers in transmission and community resistance. The farmers, this is interesting, are a group that was in general like more open to complexity in like relational dealings and business partnerships. And on the other hand, the solar developers and engineers, they wanted simplicity, they wanted control. So I think this is definitely an avenue for growth for the solar developer in approaching the farmer, and whether it comes through like a third party liaison that helps bridge these connections, or it comes from the solar developer sort of expanding their repertoire. I think that's a big avenue for growth. And you can see that also in the economics and interests. Like they're both interested in agrivoltaics and ecovoltaics, but the solar developers are more interested in the fixed leases, the things that they know, the easier land use determinations like pollinators and grazing, not for livestock product, but just to keep vegetation down. And then on the other side of the coin, the farmer and the landowner, they want more transparent business partnerships, and they want to keep doing what they're doing. When it's all said, there's not a huge, I don't think that the gaps are so far away from each other that they can't be crossed, and we can just look at this information and decide, where can we grow and how can we meet each other's needs to push agrivoltaics and renewable energy forward. So thank you so much for giving Anastassia and I the opportunity to present our research. We also want to give a big thanks to Lindy and the whole crew at Salata. They worked really hard to put Climate Action Week together, and we appreciate the opportunity to present. And we also appreciate all the hard work that other people are doing and what's being showcased this week.
Thank you, everyone. Feel free to reach out if you want to hear more.